Good evening.
Good evening.
If I were to ask you right now, what is a prophet? You might think I said who. And you might have a short list of people that fit into that category, starting with Abraham, Moses, and going all the way through all those guys who have prophet after their name in verse 1 of the books that have their name on it, right? There are a lot of prophets that we would think of. You might even go all the way to the New Testament and start with John the Baptist. He was a prophet who came before Jesus arrived and told people about Jesus coming before it happened. Jesus himself fits very neatly into the category of prophet. And in fact, usually when we call him a prophet, we give it a capital P. He is the prophet, not just a prophet, but the one that we were looking forward to coming, the Messianic prophet. And we even go after Jesus. We have John the Revelator all the way at the end of our book, who is a prophet who writes the book of Revelation. Right? Well, the New Testament doesn't really treat that word like it's a special title. It's more of an activity that one undertakes. You can be a prophet by prophesying. And Paul specifically in the book of Corinthians gives some instructions on proper conduct for prophets. Now we're going to get to Paul, but first we're going to start with Moses. Go to Numbers chapter 11 if you'd like to read what we're reading today. This passage from Numbers chapter 11 is one of the less commonly looked at, but still well-known sort of episodes from Moses' interactions with the Hebrew people after the Exodus from Egypt. They're wandering around in the desert, eating manna. And in Numbers chapter 11, starting around verse 4, the people start complaining. This manna's not good enough, Moses. We want something else. Verse 4, the rabble with them began to crave other food. And again the Israelites started wailing and said, if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we've lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna. Just more proof that it doesn't matter how much free stuff you give somebody. They didn't even have to work for the manna. They're forgetting that if you want cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic, you gotta do a little bit of gardening to get those. And you might have had all the fish you could eat, but you gotta be a fisherman if you want to get some fish. Now God is giving them food right on the top of the grass, and there's complaining. Verse 7, the manna was like coriander seed and looked like resin. The people went around gathering it, and they ground it into a hand mill or crushed it in a mortar. And they cooked it in a pot or made it into cakes, and it tasted like something they would call a bowl. When the Jews settled in the camp at night, the manna also came in. Moses heard the people of every family waiting, each at the entrance up to his tent. The Lord became exceedingly angry, and Moses was troubled. He asked the Lord, why have you brought this trouble upon your servant? What have I done to displease you that you put the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth? Why did you tell me to carry them in my arms, as a nurse carries an infant, to the land you promised on oath to their forefathers? Where can I get meat for all these people? They cannot keep wailing to me, give us meat to eat, that I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. If this is how you are going to treat me, put me to death right now. If I found favor in your eyes, and do not let me face my own fruit. Now Moses is feeling a little sorry for himself here, but he makes an interesting comparison. What was the first episode in Moses' life? His own mother, fearing for his execution as a male Hebrew baby, puts him into the river. And then she gets the job as his own wet nurse. Her own baby, under the princess's care, is given in her charge to take care of. And so Moses has put himself into his mother's place. These are your kids. You've already adopted them, and now you've given them back to me to take care of. I don't want this responsibility, God. Just kill me now. Verse 16. The Lord said to Moses, bring me 70 of Israel's elders, or known to you as leaders and officials among you. Have them come to the tent of meeting, that they may stand there with you. And I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take of the Spirit that is on you and put the Spirit on them. They will help you carry the burden of the people, so that you will not have to carry it alone. Tell the people, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow, when you will eat meat. The Lord heard you, and you wailed, if only we had meat to eat. We were better off in Egypt. Now the Lord will give you meat, and you can eat it. You do not eat it for just 1 day, or 2 days, or 5, or 10, or 20 days, but for a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and you loathe it, because you have rejected the Lord who is among you, and have went before him, saying, why did we give birth to Egypt? But Moses said, here I am, among 600,000 men on foot, and you say I will give them enough meat for an entire month? Would they have enough flocks and herds if flocks and herds were slaughtered for them? Would they have enough if all the fish in the sea were caught for them? Lord answered Moses, is the Lord's arm too short? You will now see whether or not what I say will come true for you. So now the Lord has lost his temper with the people. We see the way he describes that they're going to be eaten until it's coming out of their nose. But he hasn't quite lost his temper with Moses. He very gently answers Moses, and just watch and see. Do you think I can't handle this? I've got this. Just watch and see. Verse 24. So Moses went out and told the people what the Lord had said. He brought together 70 of their elders and had them stand around the tent. And then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke with him, and he took of the Spirit that was on him and put the Spirit on the 70 elders. And when the Spirit rested on them, they prophesied, and they did not do so again. However, 2 men whose names were Eldad and Medad had remained in the camp. They were listed among the elders, but they did not go out to the tent. Yet the Spirit also rested on them, and they prophesied in the camp. A young man ran and told Moses, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. Joshua the son of Nun, who had been Moses' aide since youth, spoke up and said, Moses, my Lord, stop them. But Moses replied, are you jealous for my sake? I wish that all the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put his Spirit on them. And then Moses and the elders of Israel returned to the king. We see a flippant sort of a prayer here, almost like an oath. Moses was almost cursing them with this ability of prophecy, right? If all of you people were prophets, then I wouldn't have to have this job. I wish God would just talk to you directly, and it wouldn't be my responsibility anymore, because you're making me crazy. How many times have we heard something along those lines? I wish to God that such and such would happen. Oh, Lord, please make it stop. God help me, or I'll finish whatever sentence you want to put in there. We hear these oath-like utterances from time to time. Sometimes they're squeezed out between clenched teeth or muttered beneath our rolled eyes and underneath our breath. Moses is praying a very exasperated, curse-like prayer here before the Lord. And we can see why that sort of emotion was certainly justified. So when we read this exasperated sort of prayer here, I wish the Lord would make you all prophets. Then what are we hearing? There's a little bit of cynicism in Moses' statement here. Even if God had 200,000 prophets or whatever, the people still would listen to them and do what he wanted them to do. Even if everybody was a prophet, they'd still not understand what God's message was, perhaps. He's being a little sarcastic, I think, because the role of prophet is not just given out to everybody, perhaps. And he's certainly exhausted with all the things he's had to deal with up to this point. But there's something else going on that maybe Moses in the moment didn't intend, but God certainly made happen. I wish that all the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put his Spirit on them, Moses said. And then in 1 Corinthians 14, Paul is speaking to an incredibly spiritually blessed people in the church in Corinth. And you remember, or if you don't, let me inform you now, that the Corinthian church are strangers to Paul at this point. He hasn't got to visit them yet. They are acquaintances of his because ministers who he has worked with have been there and in the church. He has had work with them. But this is not, if I'm remembering correctly, you can correct me if I'm getting this wrong, because I am not living over here. I do not believe that this is a place where Paul has specifically, no, he has. I'm correcting myself in real time. In chapter 1, it does mention he has been there to baptize people. Regardless, the point of what I was trying to say was, these are not people who he has spent a lot of time shepherding, and unfortunately, he's had to write these letters of correction, much like I just had to correct myself. Moving on, our point here is that Paul, in sending this letter, is trying to encourage them in a better way that his initial ministry was not able to accomplish. You see, the Corinthian church, as spiritually gifted as they are, which we see in chapter 12, have a discipline. They like to be together, and they like to all have their turn in the spotlight. And that manifests itself in several ways. One of the main ways is the Corinthians are famous, apparently to Paul, for wanting to speak in other languages, whether that be miraculous or through translation. They tend to want to speak in tongues. Now, quick aside, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but if I had a magic wand, I would zap every Bible in existence and change the word tongues into languages, because it's such a useless translation of a very simple word. We're not talking about gibberish. These are languages which human beings spoke. And that's why Paul in this passage tells them, you need a translator if you're going to speak in tongues. Because if it was gibberish, angels speak, whatever else, they wouldn't be able to translate it. You would just need interpretation from some sort of inner voice. But the purpose of speaking in tongues is that someone who speaks that language can understand you. But in this particular place, Paul is going to say something very interesting, starting at the beginning of chapter 14. Follow the way of love, and eagerly desire spiritual gifts, especially the gift of prophecy. For anyone who speaks a tongue does not speak to men, but to God. Indeed, no one understands him, and he utters mysteries with his spirit. But yet everyone who prophesies speaks to men for their strengthening, encouragement, and comfort. He who speaks in a tongue edifies himself, but he who prophesies edifies the church. I would like every one of you to speak in tongues, though I would rather have you all prophesy. He who prophesies is greater than one who speaks in tongues, unless he interprets, so that the church may be edified. So, if you're speaking in tongues, the Spirit is leading you to speak, and then you go ahead and translate that message that the Spirit is leading you to do, you're prophesying. So Paul is saying, I'd rather you all prophesy in a language that you all speak. But if you're going to prophesy in tongues, it's got to be edifying to somebody who hears it, right? So you're prophesying either way. It's just in another language or in the language that the congregation is speaking. Which one is more useful? And he says it would be better if you could speak in a way that doesn't require interpretation. Now he continues on to talk about the justifications he makes for that, but I'd like for us to arrive on the other side of all that at the end of this chapter, starting in verse 36. Paul, wrapping up his thoughts, mentions this idea again. Did the word of God originate with you? Or are you the only people it has reached? If anybody thinks he's a prophet or spiritually gifted, let him acknowledge that what I am writing to you is the Lord's command. If he ignores this, he himself will be ignored. Therefore, my brothers, be eager to prophesy, and do not forbid speaking in tongues, but everything should be done in a fitting and orderly way. I wish you all were prophets, Paul said. Totally different way than Moses meant. But with a similar level of exasperation. I wish you were all able to speak for the Lord I wish the gospel came from every one of your mouths. But I hope it's being done in an edifying way. I wish you could all prophesy, speak the Lord's message. I wish you were all preachers. But if you're going to do it, you've got to do it right. That conduct has to be useful. What a jump forward, right? From I wish you were all prophets so God could just deal with you himself, to I wish you were all prophets so that you could handle a message well for everyone around you, so that you could edify one another, so that you could encourage spiritual growth. Now, we know the Christian church had problems. We're not selling them short on their ability to need guidance. They are chief among the Christians with problems. And a great example for us in good and bad ways. Because we see by the time the second letter arrives, and Second Corinthians and second letter we have, they've made some changes, and Paul has got some new problems to deal with. But overall, they are people who are open to spiritual growth because they're people who are open to a spiritual message. So Paul wants his listeners to be spiritual speakers as well. When Moses prayed, I wish God would make all of you prophets, he probably didn't have a premonition of the church in Corinth. But what he did have was the understanding that we should also have. We each need a relationship with God's Word. We each need to have a connection to the message God wants us to have. Now, whether that's speaking it to somebody else or applying it to ourselves more fully, we need to know what it is God is saying in our lives. And I hope we can continue to do that as we engage in Bible study together and we worship God here in spirit and in truth at this congregation. If you have not joined with that worship and you need to add yourself or be added to the church rather through baptism, God is willing to do that at any time, but we offer this special occasion